Mark Badger, and I'm going to set a couple of ground rules. Basically, we all know that Disney owns Marvel, and probably most of you have seen some movie or some comic book that's made millions of dollars, and we all know none of that money goes to Jack Kirby's estate or to anybody, any relationship to Jack at all. So we're just going to not talk about that. It's accepted that he's getting screwed, okay? And you guys really are, in some sense, the rebellion that has to go out and give Jack credit for everything that's been done. And that's kind of what the whole point of the museum is to keep Jack's name and legacy alive. We're going to, we have the famous Steve Leialoha, great artist. Trina Robbins, another great artist. Writer, historian. Okay. And Bruce Simon, who's an underground cartoonist who actually worked at Marvel Mania back in the 60s and knew Jack intimately. One of the people I actually crave his childhood. Just for this reason. Trina's on another panel, so we're going to let her start and tell her story, and then we'll go into the slideshow.
Yes, I was very cleverly put on two panels that happened at the same time. Okay, so this story I have entitled Jack Kirby and the Girl Nazi. It happened in the late 70s, and if you recall, in those days, feminism was called women's liberation, and sexism was called male chauvinism, so I have to use those terms. So Jack and I are on a panel sitting side by side, and there's other people on the panel, and the panel was speaking to the audience, like that's what panels are for, I'm speaking to you. But Jack was ignoring all that and speaking to me, because everybody knew that I was a women's liberty. Hey, what happened? We lost me. Am I okay again? Okay, everyone knew that I was a, quote, women's liber. So Jack says to me, you know I'm a male chauvinist. I said, Jack, I'm sure you're not a male chauvinist. He said, oh no, I'm going to tell you a story and you'll see that I really am a male chauvinist. So this took place during World War II. And the Yanks had already marched into Germany and working their way through these small towns to get to Berlin. They were in this one town, and they had cleared out the German army, taking prisoners, but there were still snipers. So there was a sniper in a tree shooting at them. And they managed to climb the tree and get the sniper, bring the sniper down, and it turned out to be, as Jack referred to it, a girl Nazi. So the guys were furious and they wanted to hang her, because she'd been killing people. Jack said, no, you can't kill her because she's a girl. And that was Jack's way of explaining that he was a male chauvinist because he made an exception for her and you couldn't kill her because she was a girl. But the way I see this, I see it as drawn by Jack, and it's Captain America, and the girl Nazi is beautiful, of course, and angry, and she's got like braids. She has to have braids. And he's saying to Bucky, I can't hit a girl, because that's what he always said. So that's my story, and now I can go. Yay. Have a great panel.
Trina forgot to mention, but no one in the audience at the panel actually heard this story.
No, it's just Jack talking to me.
So now you guys have heard it.
So the museum, it's a couple years old now. It's online, KirbyMuseum.org. And if you join, you can get a few posters. What we're working towards is in 2017, it's the 100th anniversary of his birth, and a pop-up museum on the Lower East Side where he was born and where Street Code took place. Street Code, if you haven't seen it, it's a little autobiographical story he did about being in a gang and fighting on the Lower East Side, and you kind of go, oh, Okay, World War II in the Lower East Side, that's where Jack's Comics came from.
It was probably the last complete story he did, and his only truly autobiographical story.
So yeah, it's a chance to actually see Jack's pencils. The version we have at the museum is actually with his hand lettering of the script on it. This is just the membership stuff. I'm going to go through this pretty quick because it covers almost 100 double-page spreads of Jack's work. So you can just be amazed that in 1943 he was doing war comics and got drafted to go to the war and fight. He'd already at this point created Captain America, I think.
Yes.
And then at 46 he's doing the Marvel Age with Stan Lee, and we get the Howling Commandos, we get Fantastic Four, we get Thor in 66. 67, we get Collage, which I didn't know that Collage existed when I saw this stuff. I don't think anybody else in comics was doing it. 67.
First one in comics.
Yeah, I mean, there was the Surrealist and stuff and the Cubist. And then there's Jack going on to come back to the Cap with Bucky, more Collage, Thor and Collage. So he's 52 at this point. Can you guys see you guys can see the age. It's actually, yeah.
He would just cut up Life magazine.
Tell the story where you're with us.
If you've seen Jack's collages, and they usually have colored figures in the foreground, and the collages are just black and white. And it looks kind of odd because they had no way of reproducing them, and they're using the cheap printing process they were using at the point. But he would just collect Life magazine, and now you have to explain what Life magazine is, because it's been gone for 40 years, but it was the giant picture news magazine that just about every family got, because if you want to see what's going on in the world, visually, you got Life magazine, and it covered everything, science, life, world events. And so Jack would cut them up into tiny pieces and reassemble them. Can you go back to a collage? And it would just be this wild riot of color from the magazines, and they had no way of publishing them like that, so they would just screen them as a black and white photograph and do an overlay with Jack's characters colored like comic strip characters. But my parents, like most people, subscribed to Life magazine, but they never threw them away. They put them in the garage, so we had about 10 years worth, which was about 500 issues, which would probably weigh like a metric ton. And I mentioned to Jack about it, and I said, there's no more Life magazines, Jack, because it was, and he goes, I know. And I said, well, I have about 500. Really? So, really? Yeah. So we loaded them up in the car and dragged this ton of magazines out to Jack, and he was just flipped and happy as could be. And I was, where were you? In Los Angeles. I'm from LA. That's before I moved up here. So Jack, just about all the collages he did from then on were done with my parents' Life magazines. And that's a small connection. I always just smile to think of that.
Are any of the collages at the museum, or do they still exist? Were they sold?
If you check out my pal Scott Denvier from IDW is doing the artist editions, and I'm pretty sure there's a couple of collages in the New Gods one, and I suspect there's going to be more. They're floating around, people are getting them high-res scanned. One of the things the museum people do, we're just volunteers, but Rand, who's the director, and Tom, who's one of the board of trustees, they've got big scanners. They constantly go around to conventions and to people's houses and scan artwork as much as they can. They're trying to build a complete archive of anything that exists left of the work. So, when you join the museum, and they're working on the website, so you can go through it and have an archive to all of Jack's work, high-res scans, all the pencil Xeroxes that exist. I mean, it's really the big function of them as part of the museum. This is all stuff from the 50s, it was from his Jack's 50s when he was doing the New Gods and the Fourth World at DC.
We keep conscious of his age because we're older than Jack was when he was doing his best work.
Still not.
And it's just, it's kind of stunning because he started working professionally when he was
Chokes him up. Just got he thought of it. Slides into tears thinking about it.
I mean, and we're just showing you double-page spreads. So there's, it would be, 100 pages of this would be cool. We're going on, this is 56 now in the Commandee. And here's some of Bruce's parents. This is one of my favorite.
I would say those double-page spreads are not easy to design. Jack just seemed to do it as a matter of course.
I mean, Mike Mignola is a great artist and he's a wonderful guy. And someone posted something on Facebook and said, yeah, he's channeling Jack Kirby on a double-page spread. And it was a long shot and it was Hellboy jumping out at some monster and it was just totally cool. And I looked at it and I went, that's like about a third, a quarter, a fifth of what Jack would do on a double-page spread. I mean, Mike's got simplification down and, he's one of the people channeling Jack. Talk louder, more.
Just lean into the mic.
Lean into the mic, okay. Oh, okay.
But don't stop talking. Well, Mike is a huge Jack Kirby fan. There was a point, if you remember Cosmic Odyssey, where he spent all of his time trying to figure out what Jack did. So now there's a lot, very heavy Jack Kirby influence in Mignola's work. So, I mean, his major influences were Bertie Wrightson and Jack Kirby.
Rosetta.
Well,
NCY.
he claims it wasn't Frazetta
Oh, really?
exactly. It was, the next group that he actually grew up on, like Jeff Jones and Bertie and Jack.
Yeah, I mean, I was working with Mike on Dr. Doom, Dr. Strange at this point, so.
Mike's first professional jobs.
Yeah, and so we were basically, we would go to conventions, we would buy Jack Kirby comic books and come home and talk about them. No, I was inking and coloring. Yeah, you have it backwards. It was a long time ago. We were all very young. Yeah. That's Eternal. So this is pencil, and it's from Eternals. Do we have an English version of it? No, we just have a pencil. It says Eternals 4. This is just the pencil.
Just a copy of the pencil.
Yeah.
Yeah, you always give 100%.
How old was Jack in FF1?
What did you say? I started.
How old was Jack when FF1 was created?
Oh, it was 44. It's 1917.
So,
You would have been, so 44. Yeah, so, like the Marvel Ages is like late 40s to 50s.
And he'd already been working in comics for 25 years or more.
Yeah, that's after creating Captain America, doing all the Boy Commando stuff, doing Black Magic, some strips and all this stuff.
Fighting America.
Right, this is really late career Kirby, if you look at that arc of his career,
I think of it as the third part of his,
the third half.
the third half, yes. And that's before you get to the Pacific stuff.
Yeah, this is just starting with Pacific as creator-owned comics were coming out and being possible.
Can we go back to that one? I always loved when Jack was doing this kind of stuff. It was so unique.
It's
Well, all of it's unique, but like even more so.
And this is 82. He only worked professionally for another 2, maybe 3 years after that. And eventually he had trouble with his eyes, and he just couldn't do what he wanted to do. Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me. When Steve Lohan tells me he can't hear me, then I know I have to speak up. Right, Jack, he worked, I mean, for a man who probably did 1,000 pages a year, when he had to slow down because his eyes were going, it simplified, distortions came up in his work, and eventually he just kind of said, that's enough. Do you have any of his animation work?
I don't think there's any of the last animation in this. Because this is where, I guess it comes back to finish off the New Gods. There's so much, and it's, what's this?
1980, oh, from the Hunger Dogs. That's what they look like in color.
And that's the end.
I
So,
just wanted to make a comment about the collages, the black and white stuff. It was a custom at the comics companies that if they half-toned anything, they wouldn't put any color over the top of it. And that's why they were always printed in black and white, because they were worried about warring patterns, and probably rightly so. I mean, the printing wasn't all that good, and it probably would have looked pretty awful. But that's the reason they were all in black and white. Three separate ones. Let's explain that too. Something's off.
are we off? Are we off?
You're saying we're really close to those mics.
Okay, sorry.
Well, what I'd like to hear from you guys is, what's the first Kirby comic you got? Like, I mean, when did you get hooked into what Kirby made him different than everything else you'd been reading? And then think about when you started working professionally, what changed about how you looked at Jack from the comics you were reading to when you were drawing, and how you had to look at Jack?
Well, for me, there's several stages to that. As a little kid, I just read any comic that came along, and at a certain point, I began to realize that different people drew them, and there were certain ones I liked more than others. So I started reading Marvel Comics. I'm tempted to say right from the very beginning, but we're talking 1961 or so. I mean, of course, they started in the 30s. But the new Marvel age, I just started picking those up. And I wasn't really a fan, I just read comics. It wasn't until, I forget the number, there's an issue of Thor that came out that suddenly my little brain said, wow, this is really good. I need to get every single issue now. and that's kind of when it started. I think for me it was like probably in 64 or 65, something like that. And then I was, when I was about 19, I suddenly thought, maybe I should try and get into comics. So I wrote a letter to DC Comics and said, I sent in some sample pieces of artwork, and I was answered by Carmine Infantino, which is pretty remarkable, all things considered, that he would bother to respond. But he told me, as he put it, Jack Kirby was starting his own comic book company out in California, and I should send these to him. So it wasn't entirely accurate what he was telling me, but I did that, And I got back a very nice letter from Jack, you know, giving little helpful hints and you know, concentrate on characterization and so on and so forth. And for the young me, that was extremely encouraging. But I really didn't take it seriously until New Gods #5 came out, and I saw that, and for some reason I thought, this stuff is so great, I really need to get in on this. And at that point, I started seriously studying what Jack was doing and trying to figure out page composition, panel layouts, all of that sort of thing. And it inspired me to go to my first San Diego Comic Convention, which turned out to be the second San Diego Comic Convention. This was 1970, I believe it was. And I went because Jack Kirby was the guest of honor. And what he had on display was Jack's visions of God, inked by Mike Royer. As what, you know, the most amazing things I'd ever seen. And just, you know, everything about Jack Kirby was just so inspiring that it just made me want to do more of it. And also I put some samples, some art things in the art show, and they had judging, and I got the Jack Kirby's favorite of the show award. And I still have the little piece of paper with Jack's signature on it. So, and you know, Jack was like that with everyone. It wasn't just me. I mean, anyone who came up with to him and talked to him, he was always very encouraging and was willing to talk at great length about doing comics. And one of Roz Kirby's jobs, her part of the relationship was to drag him away when it was time to go. And just said, Jack has to go now, let's go. But, you know, a remarkably generous man.
An incredibly generous man. And I just want to say something about Steve, because I knew him when he was just starting out, and he really got thrown into the deep end of the pool for a guy just starting out, because the first two people he worked with were Jim Starlin on Warlock and Howie Chaykin on Star Wars. And they were credited as the artists and Steve was the finisher. But Steve actually, truth be told, all those stories he had to do, I saw the pages. They were stick figures and they had circles, and Steve had to pull all that stuff out of his hat as a really incredibly young guy, and I just like respect the hell out of him for that. So,
I would say it's a slight exaggeration,
but not too far off the mark. So, I first saw Jack's work. I was a Mad Magazine fan first, and didn't really mess with the overgrounds. I would see at my barbershop issues of Fantastic Four, and which I found much more interesting than the rest of the comics they had laying around there. And I really started avidly reading them around when Jack was really peaking there in 1965. And eventually, I grew up in Los Angeles, and there was a group called the Los Angeles Comic Book Club, which was one of the first organized groups of comic book fans, and a lot of people who went on to work in the industry, like Mark Mayer and Steve Sherman, and you know went through there, and we all wound up working for Marvel Mania International, which was the successor to the Mary Marvel Marching Society in Los Angeles. And we sold posters, prints, and we had a magazine, which gave previews and stickers, all of the stuff, which is all worth incredible amounts of money now. And the fellow who ran this organization, this is back when Martin Goodwin and Stanley would say, okay, to any deal that came by, they could get $2 off it. And so the fellow who ran it hired Jack to do all this artwork for the posters and everything. Giant, full-size posters. He inked himself. You've probably seen him with the Fantastic Four and the Hulk and Spider-Man and Dr. Doom. He inked them himself. He showed he didn't like the ink. He said it was a waste of his time. But he inked himself just about better than anybody. He was never paid The guy never paid him. He never paid the printer. He never paid Jack. I doubt if Marvel ever got their 2 cents. And we worked out of this crummy little office on La Cienega Boulevard in Los Angeles. And one day, this guy had a hat and an overcoat, which is like really weird in Los Angeles, you know, and came in with his wife. And I knew who he was because I knew what he looked like. He goes, "You work here?" I go, "Yeah." He says, "You see all these posters?" "Yes, sir." He goes, "I drew them." I said, "I know that, sir. Will you go up and take them down?" They were all thumbtacked to the wall. And
It's original art.
all the original art was thumbtacked to the wall. No frames, this is the cheapest. But the guy eventually just disappeared one day, and the office was empty, his house was empty, gone. Never heard from him again. Never paid anybody. It was a complete, anyway, but Jack got his originals back, and that's how I let him.
That's something. At least he got his originals.
Yes, he did, but he, yes, it's the story of Jack's life.
So I started with, this is where I hate my parents for bringing me up in Cleveland, not LA. In Cleveland, all we got was comic books that had the covers torn off of them, and I was finding these tales of suspense with Captain America stories, and they were like, "Steve, I had that, I need the next one, and I need the next one, and I need to know what happens with the sleeper." And what the heck's a sleeper? Are there really sleepers? I didn't know. And there was the visual hooks of those storytelling, and I actually found some old sketchbooks where I was drawing from them, and went, wow, I was copying Jack way back in the beginning of the days. And so that was my hook to him. My first time I saw him, I think it was when he was his 75th birthday. They had a thing for him at the San Diego. And I had just broken into comics for a couple of years. And we were sitting in a row, and there was, I don't remember who exactly was there, but it was all these 20-something kids. And Steve Root stands up and says, Jack and Roz are walking by. Jack, come over and sit with us. Come sit with us. And Jack looks at us and goes, "Oh, no, I can't sit with you real artists. I got to go sit with the old guys." And everybody just sort of fell over kind of thing. You know, because
I would always say stuff like that.
that's what drove it. As I got into comics, the main thing that I started looking at was how much Jack just pushed everything to the foreground, and it's something almost nobody does anymore, because Shooter, I don't know how many of you remember Jim Shooter running comics for a period, ran Marvel.
I remember him, tall guy.
Tall guy, he was taller than you, was he? Yeah, he was a really big, intimidating guy. So you'd break into Marvel, and Shooter would give you the $1.25 lecture on storytelling, which is a great lecture on storytelling. It's based on a Jack comic from that period that I started reading comics in. It's a Johnny Storm story with a fake Captain America in it. And it's a wonderful little adventure where they go around, and Shooter goes, it's all full figures in action. If you look at it, almost every panel you can look at a scene. It's set up, and the figures are all drawn in action. It's like the only comic Jack ever did this in, where he never cropped the figure. And Shooter found the one comic to base Marvel Comics aesthetic on for the next 10 years or so. But if you look at Jack's work, almost everything, as you can see from the large hand cropped in the foreground, going in and setting the space there. And that was the thing that I really became obsessed with, and just started trying to integrate into my work at that point. Giant anything in the foreground, and seeing if you can really get the hands coming in and pointing in. It's a really interesting challenge, you know, because everybody wants you to draw long shots now.
And let me tell you, if you come by the Jack Kirby Museum table, Mark has made a practice of redrawing a Kirby page every day in his notebook to internalize Jack's philosophy of composition, dynamism, foreground, background, focus,
things like that. And he produced a book called Abstract Kirby, which you can purchase for a donation to the museum, which is nothing but Mark's compositions based on Kirby artwork. It's fascinating. It is. It's like Garfield minus Garfield.
Well, it reminds me of in the 60s when Stan began hiring more artists. When he wanted Gil Kane to work for Marvel, but he wanted him to draw like Jack Kirby. So there's, I think, 2 issues of Captain America where Gil is completely Jack Kirby swipes, and it's really interesting because he did what Mark is doing, was copying Jack to just try to get some sense of what Jack was doing and then interpreting it in his own Gil Kane way. So it's really fascinating to see that, and after that point, Gil's stuff was a lot more dynamic. He never drew like Jack. I mean, they were completely opposite in the way they thought about laying out pages, but it's really amazing how Gil Kane absorbed that Jack Kirby influence and made his work a lot more dynamic.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I was going to say that kind of leads into, they didn't do that for Gil Kane, but Jack, to bring an artist who that's kind of storytelling that Marvel wanted to do in the 60s, they would have Jack do a couple of issues of layouts for artists who didn't know how Jack worked and were used to drawing like Western comics and war comics and love comics. They would, people like John Buscema, Warren Roth, Johnny Romita, Jack would lay out like 3 or 4 issues of their comics so they could get a sense of his storytelling and dynamism and things like that. He even Stan had the nerve to have him do that for Alex Toth on one comic, as if anybody could tell Alex Toth what to do.
That was a real waste.
It was a waste of time, of both of theirs.
But it worked really well with Steranko.
He only did that for 2 issues for Steranko, and he seemed to catch on pretty quick. So.
That's kind of a tradition in comics that you should do this more like Jack. I mean, because
That's the always thing.
Michael Golden was doing the Micronauts, and at some point someone told him, do this more like Jack. And if you look at the Micronauts that Golden did, there's this place where he jumped up forward and got this huge burst of energy from it all. Do you guys have any comments? Anybody want to have questions from the audience?
I was just curious, you were talking about how the initiative of the museum was to collect a lot of the pencil artwork in the high-res scans, but then you also talked about like later animation work that he worked on. Is there any kind of initiative to maybe collect, I don't know exactly what the terminology would be, but any of the sort of, layouts or character designs that he did on other animated shows?
They're scanning anything and everything they can get their hands on. So they've worked really hard to collect it all. I don't know if there's anybody who's working on making any of that stuff available through
They're supposed
printing.
to be. Ruby, when Jack quit comics or eased his way out of comics and started working for animation studios like Hanna-Barbera and Ruby Spears, they paid him very well and gave him health insurance and benefits, things he never had in all his years in the business. They would use him to design characters and to do pitch art, which is what they would do, big idea drawings they could take to the networks and sell and for show proposals. Jack did hundreds of those. And some of them were just penciled and some of them were full color. Every crazy idea that could fall out of his head, he pitched. I don't think any of them came to fruition, except for he worked on Thundar. But there's an amazing amount of giant, beautiful art that hardly anybody has ever seen. And I understand they're working on a coffee table book of them.
Cool. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Going back to what Trina said, why did Jack seem to have trouble drawing women?
I don't think it.
Dreamer was hot.
Yeah. I love his women.
I don't think that's
think it was more of a social comment rather than a comment on drawing.
Yes, yes. Just, Jack's notion of sexism was very different from anyone else's. He can't shoot at romances.
Well, yeah, it is a product of its time.
Exactly.
You should check out Days of the Mob.
Oh, yes.
If you want an argument that Jack could do beautiful women. I think Jack, I sort of like half agree with you that Jack never had like a really great shorthand style that translated into good cheesecake art. But there's something about Days of the Mob where if he was like looking at movie stars or whatever was coming out, where there's some drawing in there that you just go, holy cow, this is a whole different art. I mean, the thing that always amazes me about Jack is you look at his work and there's the abstract, very powerful superhero stuff, and you look at Days of the Mob and you think, he could have gone in a completely different direction and developed into a very powerful, strong, realistic, Milt Caniff type artist. He had like visual resources in his head larger than we get to see. I suspect because he was cranking out 4 or 5 pages a day, sort of thing, that amount of speed's going to go on and hurt stuff. Someone over here?
I was going to say, he did invent the love comics.
Yes,
So,
yes, and his Women of the Love comics are fabulous.
Well, I was gonna say about the love comments were great, but as far as the animation, when he was Under the Barbarian, I remember that Jack Kirby documentary. I think Mark Evanier said that he had planned to go with dinosaurs to be a Saturday morning cartoon, which I can't imagine that.
They tried to.
But who was trying?
They tried to, a lot of stuff, like Commandy, the comics companies tried a lot of things. They say that they tried to pitch as ideas that would be good. They pitched Commandy to the studios. They pitched Devil Dinosaur because they said it's a great show, The only one of these shows he designed a lot of villain and incidental characters who were super friends. And he designed a lot of the backgrounds and incidental characters for Thundar, even though Alex Toth originally designed the characters. And he did a lot of layouts for the Fantastic Four cartoon show based on some of the early stories. But yeah, back then everybody said, they got some money from the studios. It's, licensing. So things like that. They probably hope for Devil Dinosaur to be a cartoon.
So I was looking at the website, explain more about the museum's mission in terms of supporting Jack's family, please.
So do they have a line up there? I think what happens is Tracy Kirby's on the board of trustees, and she's daughter. And when profits are made off of books or something, that there's some of it is going to the Kirbys. I'm not specific on the actual financial arrangements and stuff. I mean, I know the Kirby family supports the museum. So, I mean, that's as much. I mean, she always, when we're in San Diego, she always shows up at the booth and you get into the, do you know who Jack is? Because you're at San Diego and about 90% of the people don't know who Jack is. And I actually said, so do you know who Jack is, to Tracy Kirby? And we got a laugh out of it and I felt highly embarrassed.
So, all right, I apologize for asking a second question, but
No, it's okay.
even though created by Stan Lee, Jack Kirby appears in every film,
It doesn't actually mean anything.
It doesn't mean anything. The Kirby family gets zero money from Marvel. DC pays some small royalties on reprinting his comics. And in the 80s, when they came out with a line of toys based on the New Gods characters, they paid Jack to redesign the characters, and they gave him a piece of the profits of that. So he gets some small monies from DC. Marvel pays nothing.
if I ask Stan Lee, why don't you?
He wouldn't know.
Stan created everything.
Yeah.
We try, let's not get into the rag on
No,
Stan.
no.
You can get us with a beer or 2 or 3 beers in us, and then we can rag on Stan. I just don't want to get into ragging on him just because.
Yeah.
Well, also Stan is not actually part of Marvel
Yeah.
now, right?
He's like Mickey Mouse walking around Disneyland.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just gonna share, my introduction to Jack Kirby, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
I was 5 years old in 1975 when my parents bought me my first comic. It was a Justice League, so from then on, for some reason, I was just a DC guy. Just Justice League, Superman, Batman, that's all I knew. A couple of years later is when we created the Fourth World, with Don Newton, Superman, God, and stuff. Marshall Rogers doing Miracle Man, but for some reason it didn't capture me. It didn't capture me. And then there was a Justice League, JSA, New Gods team up. And I think it was in '79. And there was a little caption that Superman's looking at Supertown. He goes, "Oh, Supertown from the now classic Jimmy Olsen 147." And I'm like, wait a minute, if it's a classic, how come I've never heard of Jimmy Olsen 147? So luckily, my town has had a comic book shop in '76, Atlantis Fantasy World plug.
Oh, Seth Cruz.
Nice store.
So
Yeah.
I went over there, asked Joe, hey, do you have a copy? It was I think it was a 10-cent bid back in those days. And I got it. My first introduction to Kirby, not my real first introduction to Kirby, was 147. Blown away. I mean, just every single panel was, as you said, it was in motion. It was kinetic. Even if someone was standing, it was in the middle of them moving to do something else. Now, doing some back issues, I got the 25 cents Jimmy Olsen's. Forever People, I got it for the first 11 issues for $3 from Atlantis. They promised it was fine or better. They were all very good, but I didn't care. And that's it. My love for Kirby art, and especially finding his old art in the reprints, is just staying with me 40 years later.
I think that's probably a pretty good wrap up. Then, I mean, I think, well, we got another, I mean,
We could go on for days.
we could go on for days. I mean, it's like almost anybody,
And this is all we talked about on the way down in the car.
An hour down, an hour back, an hour down.
I must admit, I was watching a film too, and the credits go by and it says Jack Kirby, and I said, what? There's a character named Jack Kirby? And I don't know.
You don't know?
I do know the story, but
I
you tell
don't.
it.
Back in I guess it would have been the 70s, Jack was commissioned to do some drawings for a theme park based on Roger Zelazny's Lords of Light. There's like 10 drawings. They're working on last San Diego, they were talking about working on a portfolio of them.
They did Dark Horse, I think. Did they?
I don't think it's Dark Horse. I think no one's had.
It's never been printed on.
See, they've sort of shown up occasionally. You can find them on some of them on the museum's website, but I don't think I've even seen them all. And what happened was I ran in Jimmy Carter when the hostages were taken. There was a number of hostages, like the story, who ended up in the Canadian Embassy. And that plot to go develop a movie there, they used Jack's drawings as the fake movie to go talk. That was the production design drawings that everybody did. They said, this is the movie we're going to make with these drawings, kind of thing. I think that it was a secret, that it was something that was just, it was just kind of done without his knowledge. Although it sounds like somebody went to his house and asked for the drawings at some level, and it was supposedly like done totally counter. The article, there's articles on the web about it. They're kind of written in sort of a very confusing
I agree.
language that I kind of went, I'm sorry, I just want to hear about the cool drawings, and there was all this other stuff.
Jack got mixed up with a lot of entrepreneurs and promoters over the years who never had the wherewithal to back up their fancy talk. Like there was a man who wanted to put out an entire line of comics called Kirby Comics. And that's what Silver Star and Captain Victory were originally created for in the mid-70s. And they weren't published until later. but they were created for this promoter and who couldn't step up to the plate.
Well, the Zelazny drawings were originally intended to be a theme park, which is,
Yes.
that would have been pretty mind-boggling. But
Some ride.
it's no surprise it was never built.
Yeah. Last, anyone have?
did a film, Argo.
That's what we're talking about, the Argo. I think that's, yes, what you're asking.
But they didn't use any of Jack's drawings in the movie.
So he was given a credit, why?
They made up having him being involved in the plot there.
Retroactive.
One of the
They had an
characters,
actor
they had an actor playing a guy named Jack Kirby who was drawing stuff,
This is an homage then?
just to make it more interesting as a film. It never really happened in real life. There was no team of artists working. They just borrowed Jack's drawing.
It's an homage to Jack, that's all.
Exactly. They did that to give a credit to Jack.
But Jack didn't retroactively work on anything
No.
used in the film.
No. Jack was not with us.
Jack's been dead a lot.
Yes.
Okay, so we're gonna wrap it up. Thank you for coming. Check out the table, check out the site, check